to you shortly. Thank you. And now to the business of the day. Would our chair of the day, past President Adrian Nelson, come to the podium to take over the meeting and further introduce our guest speaker. Thank you.
Well, good afternoon. As you all would fully be aware, November is Rotary Foundation month. And I know, Bernie, there's a snicker there, but you're very much on top of all this. And today we'd in particularly like to focus on Rotary's Global Peace Scholars. Now, Rotary Global Peace Scholars represent a group of exceptional individuals who have been chosen by Rotary International to play a pivotal role in promoting peace and conflict resolution worldwide. Comprising diverse backgrounds and nationalities, Rotary Global Peace Scholars share a common commitment to making a positive impact in their communities and beyond, with a specific focus on conflict prevention and peace building. Rotary Melbourne and our own Rotary District 9800 are the most successful district in the world in terms of consecutive scholarships being awarded. And we're very proud of this achievement, and in particular of our club's own Bob Fells for his contribution to the program globally. The program typically involves pursuing a master's degree or professional development certificate in fields related to peace and conflict studies or international relations at renowned universities and institutions. Our own member Carol Bond, today's MC, completed such studies at the University of Queensland. Beyond academic pursuits, Rotary Global Peace Scholars engage in practical training, research and fieldwork that prepare them to work in various capacities, from diplomacy to humanitarian organisations. This holistic approach ensures that these emerging leaders are well prepared to address the root causes of conflicts and contribute to global peace efforts. Funded by the Rotary Foundation, the scholars receive financial support covering tuition, living expenses and other educational costs, making it possible for them to focus on their studies and practical experiences. Their journey as scholars extend beyond academia as they become part of a global network of peace advocates, reinforcing Rotary International's mission of fostering goodwill and understanding across borders. In essence, Rotary Global Peace Scholars are the torchbearers of a more peaceful and just world, dedicating themselves to creating a better future for all. Of course, it's up to all of us to identify future Global Peace Scholars and nominate for the program. And if you do identify anyone, please speak to Bob or Carol to find out more. There's no better time to be putting forward new Global Peace Scholars. Which brings me to today, and today's guest speaker is Lucienne Heyworth. Lucienne was successfully nominated by Rotary Melbourne and the Fitzroy Rotary Club for a Rotary Peace Fellowship at Uppsala University in Sweden, where she obtained a Master of Peace and Conflict Resolution. She also has a Master of Teaching from Melbourne University, which subsequently awarded her the Early Career Alumni Award. In 2019, she was one of only 6 recognised worldwide by Rotary International as People of Action, which required her to make a presentation at the United Nations in New York on her Education in Emergencies curriculum. Disappointingly, however, the United States government would not grant her a visa because she had worked in Syria and she was unable to attend the UN. She's worked for UNESCO in Lebanon, developing education programs for the Arab states. And while there, the massive ammonium nitrate explosion or Beirut blast occurred while she was at home with her husband and 6-month-old daughter, just 5 kilometres away, blowing out her doors, her windows, and much of her apartment. This is real-life conflict experience. We're pleased that she's now back in Melbourne with her husband, daughter and son. Her husband is a Gazan Palestinian, so she's very much in the thick of peace and conflict resolution issues. She works for Care Australia, and next week, as part of her Pacific responsibilities, will be in Tonga, overseeing reflections on the response to the 2022 volcanic eruption. Please put your hands together and welcome to the stage, Lucienne Heyworth.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much. It's always lovely to hear these introductions. It always makes me feel like I don't deserve all the accolades and things, so thank you so much. Perhaps the first thing I'd like to do, because I think it's not done enough, is really just to say thank you to Rotary and to yourselves and to the whole wider Rotary Foundation, because the opportunity that was provided to me as a Rotary Peace Fellow was truly life-changing, and I think that perhaps that information doesn't get flown back to Rotarians and people who have really made that kind of thing possible for people like me and a lot of my friends. So please take my sincere thank you and gratitude for that opportunity, and also for the opportunity of being able to come here today and talk to all of you. It's really a fantastic opportunity that I was given, and I'm very thankful for it. So based on that introduction, I won't go into too much detail of who I am sort of at the basics, but yes, I was a fellow at the Uppsala program, and I was there for the 2 years in the beautiful old, I think Bob's got the tie on today from the Chancellor of the University, 1777, so it's a very historic university, an incredibly well respected and renowned university, particularly for peace and conflict studies, and in Europe, very well known for its huge database. They're one of the largest databases that are accumulated by academics and students there, mapping conflicts around the world. So if you're a bit of a data buff, or if you're interested in sort of searching things online, I encourage you to have a look at the Uppsala University website and see some of that really fantastic research and work that comes out of the university through the Department for Peace and Conflict Resolution. I am a Peace Fellow, but I would also like to think of myself as a humanitarian, and a lot of the work that I've been involved in sort of sits on that side of humanitarian support, and predominantly through education programming. So my dad, who's here today, and my mother, and a lot of very strong influences of mine were teachers. And I actually did the Teach for Australia program, which some of you may be familiar with, but it basically takes people into an expedited teaching degree where you focus on understaffed and underprivileged schools in Australia, and you teach their ex-numerary to their budget, so supported by government and other funds, to be able to raise educational outcomes for young Australians. And I did that thankfully in the western suburbs of Melbourne, in Deer Park, for 2 years, and got my Masters of Teaching at the same time. So education and children, I think you mentioned earlier in the conversation, are really a passion of mine, and I think that's really sort of pulled me through all of my experiences to date. We've touched a little bit on what the Peace Fellowship is in terms of the basics, but to me, the Peace Fellowship started, I was actually in Jordan. I was working with the United Nations Relief and Works Agency, which some of you might actually be quite familiar with or becoming familiar with as a result of what's going on currently in Palestine. Because the United Nations Relief and Works Agency is the primary UN body responsible for supporting Palestine refugees wherever they are, and in the 5 fields of operation, so Gaza, the West Bank, Jordan, Syria, and Lebanon. So I was sitting at my desk and at a position there where I was working to support teachers and school principals with improving their skills and competencies in classrooms, and I got an email. And the email said Rotary Peace Fellowship. And I thought, oh, what's this? And I sort of started the email, got on with my day, and then actually had another look at it and thought, oh, I think I might be eligible for that. And I came back to Australia on a brief trip, and I thought I'll just make a couple of calls. And it said to call your local Rotary club. So I called up the Rotary Fitzroy and spoke to somebody, and at the time someone didn't know what it was, which is fair because perhaps it isn't the most publicised program. But around and about, I got in touch with Bob, and I got in touch with another gentleman at the Fitzroy Club, and I actually had my interview. I think, Bob, you were on the panel at the time. I think I had my interview about the program while I was sitting back in Jordan when I'd returned from my trip to Australia, with about 3 or 4 different Rotarians interviewing me for my place in the program for the endorsement. And I think it took around 7 or 8 months from that endorsement of my application through to the granting of my Peace Fellowship by Evanston, and then being told I was able to go to Uppsala. What does the Peace Fellowship produce? I think that's a really important factor to be aware of. So myself, I'm just one example, but the Peace Fellowship and the people that I know who have been Peace Fellows are quite a varied group of people, and they could work in or continue their engagement in peace in very, very different ways. There are people who work for and are organisationally leading or participating in programs for UN agencies, for international NGOs, for local NGOs. It could be with local community or local government. But I think that everybody that I know right now, most of which haven't actually returned to their home country and are now in third countries living and working, are all contributing to activities to build a sense of positive peace or to deal with conflict resolution and peace building across sectors like research. So lots of PhDs and really meaningful research investigating peace building. I have a friend who is actually running an organization that works with artists in exile and people who are from conflict societies and brings them together in Cyprus to do arts-based peace building, and in particular young people who work in different art mediums. I have a good friend of mine who flies in and out of Somalia and is working with local community organizations there to support them in terms of community engagement and practice. So they're just some examples. I think that it's really important to know that building peace doesn't just mean mediation, and it doesn't just mean academic research and that kind of thing. It's really efforts dedicated with the understanding and knowledge that you get from the peace program into different sectors where you might work, and making sure that you maintain that vision for a more peaceful world, essentially. Working for peace for myself looks like, as I mentioned, education. So I have worked in Jordan on the education programs and also professional development for teachers and school principals. I moved to Lebanon, as was mentioned, and I worked there with UNESCO with a primary focus on Syria. So traveling in and out of Syria quite a lot and working with the Ministry of Education there, but also with organizations such as the Jesuits to deliver non-formal education programs, which means if you picture it, children who are displaced internally within Syria, they no longer have access to school in the fashion that we would understand it, or are so far behind in their schooling that it doesn't really make sense for them to re-enter a formal education program. And we would have classes and groups of children coming in and learning an informal program to support their basic literacy, basic numeracy. And these programs were often run by volunteers. So we would run the curriculum and train these young people to support the children to catch up, if you like, and hopefully re-enter the formal program. I also worked with the Syrian government at the time to look at how they could put in place long-term education plans that would enable their funding by big global funds for education in emergencies. So I think at the time then, that would have been around 2016, we were talking about a 5-year transitional education plan that would allow around $25 million to support young people to reach education again in Syria. Also, while in Lebanon, I switched work from UNESCO and I started working with Caritas Switzerland. With Caritas Switzerland, I was again a regional education program manager, and it was there in 2020 that I was lived through the explosion, the Beirut explosion, which was quite harrowing, of course, and very, very scary. And given the status of my husband, who is stateless, according to international law, but Palestinian by background, we could not really comfortably stay in Lebanon because of the way that Palestinians are looked upon in the region as a whole. It was quite unsafe because we weren't sure what the explosion was. So in those moments afterwards, when you find yourself on the street and you're looking to make sure you're somewhere where buildings won't fall on you, you just think, how do we survive this moment? And I went to a Syrian refugee family that I knew very well, my old neighbours, and I actually went to the house and stayed with them for the 3 or 4 hours afterwards, and we had some really great conversations about what to do next. And of course, at that time, we really didn't know if it was the start of a new conflict. We didn't know if it was an intentional explosion. We didn't know what it was. So we booked a flight that night And for the following morning at 6 a.m., we got on a flight with my 6-month-old daughter and left. And we left everything we had, and we couldn't go back. So my husband would never be allowed back into the country because he was only allowed in there by virtue of my work with the UN. So we went to Turkey the next day and we started again. But I maintained my position with Caritas Switzerland. And of course, once such a big emergency event like that happens, your entire work portfolio changes to address an emergency. So the programs we had previously been funding in Lebanon were things like non-formal education, catch-up programs, really trying to support young people to get back into education. But after so many schools were damaged, I think the estimates are something like $50 billion worth of damage happened as a result of that explosion. My entire next 12 months was spent on what became the Beirut Blast education response. So rebuilding schools, trying to figure out how to deliver education programs to children who could no longer get to a school. And this is all COVID too, right? So it was happening around the world. Everybody was struggling with how to deliver remote education, but in somewhere like Lebanon, this was incredibly difficult. And we worked with large international donors, including the Swiss Development Cooperation, to rebuild schools, to devise and deliver curriculum, tried to find ways we could install and get network connectivity to be able to deliver remote education programs, bought tablets for children, and also we provided cash for education, which was a one-off cash payment to families to be able to have the resources to be able to give to educating their children when resources were so tight that people were making decisions between food, rewarding work, but also very, very challenging and unexpected. But that's what happens when you work in this kind of sector, is that you pivot as quickly as you can to emergency response. Beyond that time, so I was still working on the Beirut response until 2022 when I moved back to Australia. And I moved back here to be with my dad. It had been a while, and I have 2 young children, 2 and 4. During that time, actually, I had my second child in Turkey and was stuck in Turkey and delivered there because the last flight that was available back to Australia, I got COVID 5 days before. So that was another unpredicted situation. So my son was born there. But since I've come back, I've been fortunate because I've maintained my engagement with UN agencies. So I currently do consulting with UNICEF or one of its large funds, which is called Education Cannot Wait. And I've been very, very lucky to be able to support work on the Rohingya response. So trying to support organisations on the ground in developing proposals for education responses to enable around $20 million to come in and top up the education response there. And with Care Australia, I started around a year ago with Care Australia. And as was mentioned, I work there. And again, in a bit of a shift, a bit of a pivot. And that's why it's important to know that the peace connection goes beyond just mediation and working on peace building. But now I'm focused on disaster response and preparedness and emergency response to the Pacific. So in this case, it's the Tonga volcano that happened a couple of years ago, and also working the Solomon Islands, Fiji, and Kiribati on drought. Ironic for Kiribati because it's an island, you might feel, but yes, on drought response. And actually the Tongan government's just announced a national drought as well. So that's what I've been working on essentially. But of course, as was also mentioned, I think it would be remiss of me as a peace fellow and also as somebody committed to humanitarian work not to mention what is happening in Palestine at the moment. And I think it's a huge and if not the biggest humanitarian crisis that we've seen in this sector for years. And it is something that is, I believe, really reaching a point of changing global consciousness around what does it mean to be a humanitarian, what does it mean to have humanity, and what do our international humanitarian law and humanitarian norms mean, and how can we uphold them? Because it's a huge and very, very blatant contravention of international humanitarian law, what's happening there at the moment, and the scale of the destruction is immense. So I think, and I really implore you also to, if you aren't familiar with what's going on there, please do read Educate yourself also about the history of colonial and oppressive activities that happen in Palestine, because we are reaching a point where a genocide is happening, and we must speak out about it. I think yesterday the Rotary Peace Fellows globally made a statement on the genocide happening in Palestine. So please do educate and read, and I'm very happy to provide resources about that. But it's something really of our time that I think we do have power to change things, and it would be fantastic to see Rotary stand in that space also. That's all from me, because I prefer to give you a bit of an overview of who I am and where I'm from, and if there's any questions, it would be fantastic to hear them.
Great. Well, thanks, Lucienne. Carol's got the microphone there, so she'll be asked questions, but because I've got the microphone here, I get to ask the first one. I guess, given your experience, you're just touching on Palestine and Gaza, what's the first step for education coming out of a situation like they have? What do they do? What happens?
So I was working on the Gaza response in 2014. So some of you may recall in 2014 there was again very heavy bombardment in Gaza, a great loss of life and also displacement of people. And at that time, in my position with UNRWA, I was working pretty much around the clock with the Director of Education at their headquarters to develop educational materials that could be given to not just teachers, but also just adults that would be in the makeshift learning centres, to be able to continue to engage with young people around basic numeracy and literacy and provide a sense of normalcy, I guess you could say, of that time in having access to education. But right now, many of the schools, if not already being targeted and bombed themselves, which is where people are staying because there is nowhere to go, they are not even looking at that. I mean, at the moment I have a friend on the ground in Gaza working with UNRWA, and he says he's not been able to provide any humanitarian support because of the constant bombardment. So it will be months until those schools, facilities, if at all, are able to be vacated, because they're populated by over 500,000 people are living in UNRWA schools at the moment. And the first priority is safety, access to drinking water, access to fuel to be able to run hospitals. So it's months down the track, but I am hopeful that I'll be able to. I've reached out to all my old contacts, and I'm very hopeful to be able to be there to help in some way in devising education materials or providing trainings, or I'd love to go. That would have a heart attack, but yeah, so I think it's a long way down the road, the education response for now.
It's Philip. I mean, I think Adrian raises a point, and it's one of the things that, you know, we see with conflict and peace, how to sort of address these things. And you look around the world today, and really the big leaders are too afraid to say anything. Yes. And I say to myself, what do I think Gaza's going to look like in a year's time? And I've got to say to myself, the Israelis aren't going to stop, and Gaza's going to be flattened. And anyone who stays there, they'll stay there at their own peril. And I do wonder, that's not the solution that anyone's looking for, but at the moment, no one's making any hard decisions. And I can just see a disaster looming. And I just wonder, with your experience in that part of the world with Syria and Iran, et cetera, when do they get involved?
I think if they were going to get involved, they would have, to answer that latter question. I think, you know, there's natural ways that supporting the right of Palestinians to their own land are available, and standing up in terms of supporting, even at a diplomatic level, what should be done there, which is an immediate ceasefire. There's nothing else. A humanitarian pause is a complete farce. You're going to pause, provide food and water, and then kill them? Like, it makes no sense. So an immediate humanitarian ceasefire is required right now. And the majority of countries of the United Nations have supported that, with two exceptions, and that's Israel itself and the US. And the US is the one that holds the power there. So I think there's complicity in what is essentially a genocide happening now, endorsed by the United States. What happens between now and in a year's time is very hard. I think that the overall program that's been proposed is to clear the entire north of Gaza and push as many Palestinians as possible into the Sinai, into the desert. Because as an ultimate colonial settler project, they want the entire land mass, and they can't take it without the Palestinians being not there. So they cannot move because it's completely closed. Nobody enters or exits Gaza without permission from the Israelis. Full stop. So death or moving further south, ultimately probably out. Yeah.
Thanks, Carol. Bernie McIntosh, thank you for your speech. Successes that you've had, can you give us a couple of success stories that you might have been in, even little ones? Just. Of course. Well, two babies is wonderful, and hopefully they don't end up barracking for Essendon. But
Sure. Look, I was talking about this a little bit earlier. I think like when you work for and you genuinely want to work for the improvement of the lives of other people, the successes for myself are always when you're with the community, when you're with a community in their place, where they're from, and you are able to listen to them and really understand what's going to make a positive change for their lives, and you have the power to deliver it. That's a huge success. So, you know, that's always what I think of, working in and being in schools with young children who are accessing opportunities to be with one another, to be children, to laugh and to play and to learn to read and write and have joy in what is often an incredibly sad, broader picture. These are the huge successes that you feel, and they motivate you, you know, because you think, how can I get back into that place and be in a position to be able to help again and again and again, you know? And I think, yeah, though some examples would absolutely be Syria. I think Syria is one of the most joyful places I've been. Damascus is an incredible city, and the people have such joy. Yeah, the children there, they lighten up your whole life and your heart. You know, they're wonderful kids, and they've been through so much, and yet they find so much joy, which is really incredible. And the same with the camps. Like there are the refugee camps for Syrians in Jordan, and there are refugee camps in Jordan of Palestinians from 48 and 67, and yeah, the joy of children, I think, is the success in large part, and then also being able to talk to parents who reflect that, you know, and say they're learning from their children how to navigate hard times through the joy that is brought through the programs we deliver to kids. Yeah.
Any more? I think that's enough time for. Oh no, we'd better let Bob have the last say. Bob.
I think you've displayed remarkable resilience and you've really experienced conflict firsthand. What do you put your energy down to?
Oh, energy. I don't know. Raised never to rest. No, I think you. I'm motivated by the opportunity, I suppose. Like I genuinely see life as, you know, life is finite and we only have so much time. I think there was a question I had actually to my dad when I was going to university, and I had a choice between like media and communications and international relations. And I was like, I don't know which one, I couldn't choose. And then I remember saying to my dad, which one should I choose, Dad? And he's like, well, if you were to, drop dead the day you finished your university, would you rather learn about the world or about media and communications? I was like, the world. And he's like, well, take that. So I think I'm just really motivated about having learnt about other people and recognizing humanity in their experience. I think there's always opportunity for it here, overseas, everywhere. Yeah.
Wow. There's a number of people to thank for today. First of all, I'd like to thank any person who's ever contributed to the Rotary Foundation, because it's those contributions that go towards Lucienne and people like Lucienne that we can hear about the amazing work that she's been doing. I'd also like to thank anyone who's ever contributed in a practical way to making these Rotary Foundation projects and scholarships happen. And of course, we've got Bob Fells here in the room, who's a living, breathing example of that. But without the people who actually follow through with the money that we receive to then make sure these programs happen, they never would happen. But most of all, of course, I'd like to thank Lucienne for showing us the power of what our Rotary Foundation programs can achieve by picking the right people who then go on to achieve great things. And she's still only early years into achieving greatness in whatever she can do to help, in particular in her case, children in education in areas of peace and conflict. So on behalf of our club, thank you so much for addressing us today in Rotary Foundation Month. We have a small gift for you as well. So I'm going to have, courtesy of the questionnaire over there, Philip Endersby and his wonderful business Wilderness Wear. We have some special Rotary socks for you to wear.
Yes.
So think of them as peace socks. So wherever you travel throughout the world,
Taking them to Tonga this weekend.
so that'd be fantastic. The world travelling Rotary peace socks. And please put our hands together and thank Lucienne for today. Of course.